A corrupt bully brutally slapped a 78-year-old widow, sending her crashing to the floor in a crowded diner. The entire room just watched. They were frozen in fear, too scared to say a word. The bully laughed, thinking he was an untouchable king in his small town. He believed his power was absolute, but he had made a fatal mistake. He didn't know her son was a Navy SEAL, and he and his K-9 partner were about to walk through that door. The air in Havenwood, Ohio, carried the clean, crisp promise of the coming autumn. It was early October, and the vast fields surrounding the town were a breathtaking tapestry of gold, crimson, and deep green. A light frost had silvered the edges of the corn stalks through the night. Now, as the morning sun climbed over the flat horizon, it melted into sparkling droplets that caught the light like tiny diamonds. The scent of turned earth and harvested corn was a constant, welcome companion. This was the peace Eleanor Vance had been searching for. A woman in her late 70s with soft white hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes the color of a gentle sky. She pulled her knitted shawl tighter around her shoulders. She was a widow, a woman who had weathered the storms of a long life with a quiet grace that was often mistaken for fragility. But beneath its surface was a resilient core of steel forged in love, loss, and the steady raising of a remarkable son. That son, Jack, had recently bought a beautiful, secluded house on the edge of Miller's Reservoir, just outside of town, insisting she deserved a sanctuary away from the noise of the city. This extended stay was his gift, a place for her to breathe. She pushed open the glass door of the Main Street diner, a cheerful bell announcing her arrival. The diner was the heart of Havenwood, a cozy haven of worn wooden booths, red vinyl stools, and the comforting aroma of fresh coffee, sizzling bacon, and maple syrup. It was exactly the kind of place she loved, unpretentious and warm. Behind the counter, a young woman named Maya moved with an efficiency that belied her age. Maya, in her early 20s, had a sharp, observant gaze and a mane of dark, curly hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She'd grown up in Havenwood and understood its rhythms, both the gentle currents and the dangerous undercurrents. She flashed a quick, genuine smile. "Morning, ma'am. Just you today?" "Just me," Eleanor confirmed, her voice soft but clear. "A booth by the window, if you please." "Not a problem at all." As Eleanor settled into the booth, her gaze drifted to the scene outside. A young man, probably a tourist, was setting up a camera on a tripod across the street. This was Ethan Cole, a travel vlogger with a modest but growing following, known for his Heartland America series. He was a bundle of optimistic energy with a bright smile and a trendy beanie pulled over his blonde hair. He adjusted his lens, hoping to capture the diner's rustic charm, a perfect establishing shot for his video on the hidden gems of Ohio. Eleanor's moment of peace was shattered by a booming voice that seemed to suck all the warmth from the room. Well, look what we got here. More city money coming in to grace us with their presence." The voice belonged to Burt Drummond. He was a large, intimidating man in his 50s, a local contractor whose physique was built more from beer and grievances than hard labor. His face was perpetually flushed, and his small, calculating eyes scanned the diner as if he owned it. He wore a dusty work coat and a sneer that seemed permanently etched onto his lips. He was sitting in a corner booth with two other men, his silent sycophants, who chuckled on cue. Eleanor chose to ignore him, turning her attention to the menu. But Burt was not a man to be ignored. He heaved himself out of his booth, his heavy work boots thudding on the linoleum as he made his way toward her. The low murmur of conversation in the diner faltered and died. Everyone knew Burt. Everyone knew to stay out of his way. He stopped beside her table, casting a large shadow over her. "Don't see many of your kind in here," he said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "Usually they stick to the fancy bistros over in the county seat." Eleanor looked up at him, her expression serene. "I find the coffee here is much better," she replied politely. Behind the counter, Maya's smile had vanished. Her jaw was tight. She knew exactly what this was. Burt Drummond was the blunt instrument of Harrison Price, the developer who was trying to buy up the entire reservoir shoreline. Burt's specialty was persuading reluctant sellers. Maya slowly reached her hand beneath the counter, her fingers finding her phone. She discreetly propped it up between a napkin dispenser and a stack of menus, ensuring the camera had a clear view of Eleanor's booth, and hit record. This wasn't the first time she'd seen him bully someone, but this felt different, more vicious. Burt's sneer widened. "Is that so? Well, enjoy it while you can. Some of us are trying to preserve what makes this town special, not turn it into a playground for rich folks who don't belong. I assure you, sir, I have no intention of changing your town," Eleanor said, her voice still even, though she could feel a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She thought of her late husband, a man of immense kindness and quiet strength. He would have known how to handle a man like this, not with aggression, but with a firm, unshakable dignity that would make a bully feel small. She channeled that memory, that strength. "Oh, I think you do," Bert shot back, his voice rising, drawing the attention of everyone in the diner, including Ethan outside, who now zoomed his camera in, intrigued by the unfolding drama. "I hear you're the one holding up progress out at the reservoir. There's a real good offer on the table for that property your boy bought, but you're too stubborn to see reason." So that was it. This wasn't a random act of hostility. It was targeted. It was about the house. Jack had warned her the developer was aggressive, but she hadn't expected this. "The house is not for sale," Eleanor stated, a note of finality in her voice. "My son bought it for our family." Bert leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "Your family? You mean the son who's never here? The one who threw a pile of cash at a house and left his old mother here to be a thorn in the side of hardworking local folk?" He planted his thick, greasy knuckles on her table. "This is a small town, lady. We got our own way of doing things. We don't appreciate outsiders coming in, buying up prime real estate, and refusing to cooperate. It upsets the natural order of things." Eleanor could feel the eyes of the other patrons on her. She saw fear in some, discomfort in others, but no one moved to intervene. They were caught in the web of small-town politics, afraid of a man who held influence through intimidation and connections. She felt a profound sense of isolation, one she hadn't known since the first few weeks after her husband had passed. But she would not be cowed. "There's nothing natural about trying to bully a woman into selling her home," she said, her voice small, but ringing with authority. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to enjoy my breakfast in peace." The defiance in her voice seemed to snap something in Bert. His face shifted to a darker shade, a mottled crimson. The pretense of a conversation was over. This was naked intimidation now, and he was enjoying his audience. Bert Drummond's face was a mask of pure fury. The quiet, unyielding dignity of the woman before him was an insult he couldn't tolerate. In his world, power was loud, crude, and physical. Her calm was a language he didn't understand, and it enraged him. Eleanor knew she couldn't win a battle of wills with such a man. There was no reasoning with him. Her only option was to remove herself from the situation. With a grace that defied the tension in the air, she rose to her feet, placing a few crisp dollar bills on the table to pay for the coffee she would never drink. "I wish you a better day, sir," she said, her voice a soft whisper, and turned to leave. That was the final spark. Her refusal to engage, her calm dismissal of him as nothing more than an unpleasant interruption, pushed Bert over the edge. He moved with surprising speed for a man his size, stepping in front of her to block her path to the door. "You think you're better than me?" he snarled, his voice echoing in the deathly silent diner. Spittle flew from his lips. "You walk in here, looking down your nose at us, and then you just walk away." Before Eleanor could react, he swept his thick arm across the small table. The heavy ceramic mug, half full of hot coffee, went flying. Eleanor gasped and recoiled as the hot liquid splashed across the floor and wall, a few scalding drops landing on the back of her hand. The sound of the mug shattering on the linoleum was like a gunshot. The shock of the act, its sudden violence, left her reeling. For a moment, she was disoriented, her heart hammering in her chest. It was in that moment of vulnerability that Bert made his play. He saw her fear, and it fed the ugly fire inside him. He drew his hand back, the thick gold ring on his finger glinting in the fluorescent lights, and swung. The sound of the slap was sharp, ugly, and final. It cut through the silence, a sound that would be seared into the memory of everyone present. Eleanor cried out, a small, sharp sound of pain and shock. The force of the blow wasn't overwhelming, but the surprise and her loss of balance sent her stumbling backward. Her heel caught on the leg of a chair, and she fell, collapsing in a heap on the cold, hard floor. A collective gasp went through the diner. Patrons were frozen, forks halfway to their mouths. Across the street, Ethan Cole's jaw dropped. His camera, still rolling, had captured the entire horrific sequence in perfect, high-definition clarity. Behind the counter, Maya Vance felt a cold rage rise, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the counter, her own phone still faithfully recording the crime. And then the bell over the door jingled. The man who entered was the physical opposite of Bert Drummond. He was in his late 30s, dressed in a simple dark blue flannel shirt, faded jeans, and sturdy work boots. The clothes were casual, but they couldn't hide the coiled power in his frame. The broad shoulders, the lean, hard torso, it was the body of a man whose body was a finely tuned weapon. He moved with an unnerving economy of motion, a predator's grace. His eyes, a deep blue that held none of his mother's gentleness, swept the room and took in the scene in a fraction of a second. He saw his mother on the floor. He saw the shattered mug, and he saw Burt Drummond standing over her, chest puffed out like a conqueror. This was Jack Riley. At his side, on a simple leather lead, was Kaiser. The German Shepherd was a magnificent animal, 100 pounds of sleek black and tan muscle. Its ears were erect, its intelligent, dark eyes fixed on Burt. It didn't bark or lunge. It sat perfectly still, radiating a calm, controlled energy that was somehow more terrifying than any overt aggression. Jack's gaze locked on his mother. His expression didn't change, but a switch had been flipped. The civilian was gone. The Navy SEAL was in control. He issued a single, low command. Watch. The word was barely a whisper, but Kaiser reacted instantly. It moved from a sit to a low crouch, a deep rumble starting in its chest. It wasn't the sound of an angry pet. It was the professional warning of a trained military asset. It didn't attack. It surged forward, placing its body directly between Burt and the fallen Eleanor, its eyes never leaving the bully. The message was unmistakable. You will not take another step toward her. Burt Drummond, who had faced down angry husbands and rival contractors, froze. His bluster, so potent just a moment ago, evaporated in the face of the silent, lethal promise radiating from the dog. He took an involuntary step back. Jack ignored him completely. He strode forward, his steps silent and measured, and knelt beside his mother. Mom, are you okay? His voice was gentle, the hard edge gone, reserved only for her. Jack, she whispered, her hand going to her reddening cheek. I'm fine, honey. Just a bit startled. He helped her to her feet with an easy strength, his eyes scanning her for any injuries. He saw the red mark on her cheek, the coffee splash on her hand, and something cold and hard settled in his gaze. Once he was sure she was steady, he turned his full attention to Burt Drummond. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The low, even tone he used carried more menace than any shout. You just made a serious mistake. From a booth in the back of the diner, another man had been watching the scene unfold. Sheriff Roy Miller, a man in his late 50s with a weathered, cynical face, slowly set down his coffee cup. He wore his uniform with a lazy, comfortable air, the silver star on his chest polished, but his demeanor suggested he hadn't had to do any real police work in years. He had watched Burt's performance with a bored detachment. Burt was a useful tool, and the old woman was a nuisance, but this was new. The arrival of this silent, dangerous-looking man and his military-grade dog was an unplanned complication. It looked like he was finally going to have to step in. Not to arrest Burt, of course not, but to manage the situation, to control the fallout. He slowly pushed himself out of the booth, adjusted the gun belt on his hips, and began to amble toward the center of the diner, his face a mask of practiced, official concern. Sheriff Roy Miller strolled over, his posture a steady and practiced nonchalance. He approached the tense standoff, not with urgency, but with the weary air of a man bothered by a noisy dog. His eyes, however, missed nothing. He noted the phone in the waitress's hand, the tourist with the camera across the street, and the unyielding stance of the stranger. All right, folks, let's all just take a breath, the sheriff said, his voice a local drawl meant to soothe and command. He gave Burt a familiar nod. Burt, you getting an early start on the drinkin' today? Burt Drummond, who had been momentarily paralyzed by Kaiser's presence, seemed to find his footing now that an ally had arrived. Sheriff, it ain't nothin', just a little misunderstanding. This lady here. I saw what happened, Jack cut in, his voice quiet, but sharp enough to slice through the sheriff's feigned calm. He didn't look at the sheriff, keeping his focus entirely on Burt. Sheriff Miller finally turned his gaze on Jack. And who might you be, son? He's my son, Eleanor said, her voice a little shaky but firm. Jack Riley, Jack supplied, still not taking his eyes off Burt. Well, Mr. Riley, the sheriff said, stepping between Jack and Burt, a subtle move to break the confrontation. Here in Havenwood, we handle our own disagreements. No need to let things get out of hand. Why don't you take your mother on home and we'll call it even? It was a dismissal, a blatant attempt to sweep the assault under the rug. Jack recognized it immediately. He'd seen the same tactic in corrupt local jurisdictions all over the world. This disagreement was felony assault, Jack stated flatly. And I expect an official report to be filed. The sheriff's friendly mask hardened. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. Listen here, son. I'm the law in this town, and I say what goes. It was a heated moment. No real harm done. Jack finally turned his head, his piercing blue eyes meeting the sheriff's for the first time. The sheriff felt an unexpected jolt, as if he were being assessed and found wanting by a predator. My mother was knocked to the floor, Jack said, each word precise and cold. There are at least a dozen witnesses, and that man, he nodded toward Bert, is either going to be arrested, or this is going to become a very different kind of problem. He gave the leash a gentle tug. Kaiser, sit. The German Shepherd instantly broke its watch, moving back to sit perfectly at Jack's side, though its eyes remained locked on Bert. Jack put a steadying arm around his mother's shoulders. Let's go, Mom. He led her toward the door, moving with a purpose no one dared to challenge. As they passed the counter, he made brief eye contact with Maya, giving a slight, almost imperceptible nod of thanks. Once outside in the fresh, clean air, Jack settled his mother into the passenger seat of his rugged Ford F-150. He checked her cheek again, the red mark already starting to darken. A cold, controlled rage was simmering just below his calm exterior. He went around to the driver's side and, before starting the engine, he pulled out his phone. It wasn't a standard smartphone. It was a ruggedized, encrypted device. He scrolled through a short list of contacts and pressed a name. The call was answered on the first ring. Go for Wilson, a gruff voice on the other end said. This is Jack Riley, he began, his voice devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the gentle tone he used with his mother. I'm reporting a deliberate physical assault on a military dependent. My mother, Eleanor Vance. Incident occurred in Havenwood, Ohio. Assailant has been identified. Local law enforcement is on site and appears to be compromised. I'm requesting an immediate NCIS liaison and a formal case file opened. He listened for a moment. Affirmative. I have secured the dependent. We're proceeding to a safe location. I have multiple civilian video recordings of the incident. We'll forward when secure. He ended the call. Meanwhile, across the street, Ethan Cole was having a vlogger's eureka moment. His hands were shaking with adrenaline. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he had just captured the video of a lifetime. He didn't hesitate. He packed up his gear, hurried back to his rented cabin, and immediately started uploading the raw, unedited footage to his channel. He agonized for a moment over the title before settling on something with maximum viral potential. Thug savagely attacks elderly woman, confronted by Navy SEAL and K-9 protector. He hit publish. The effect was instantaneous. In the first hour, the video had 100,000 views. By the third hour, it had passed 1 million. The online outrage was a tidal wave. The comment section was a deluge of anger and support. That old man is a coward. Find him. Did you see that dog? That's a trained military K-9. Good boy. Who is that hero? Someone get that man a medal. The video was shared by every major veterans support group on social media. It was picked up by news aggregators, then cable news outlets. The ripple effect had become a tidal wave. In a sleek, glass-walled office in Columbus, Harrison Price, a man in his late 40s with slicked back hair and a suit that cost more than most cars, slammed his fist on his mahogany desk. Harrison was the architect of the Miller Reservoir Preserve Project, a man who saw landscapes not as places of beauty, but as assets on a balance sheet. He was watching Ethan's video on his computer, his handsome face twisted in an angry snarl. Idiot, he hissed, grabbing his phone. He dialed a number. Get me Hayes, now. A few miles away, Mayor Richard Hayes, a man in his early 60s whose polished, grandfatherly image concealed a core of pure avarice, was in a meeting about town beautification. His phone buzzed with an urgent text. He excused himself, stepped into his private office, and took the call. Harrison, this had better be important. Your man, Drummond, is a liability, Price snapped, his voice tight with fury. He's all over the internet for assaulting an old woman. And not just any old woman. Apparently, her son is some kind of special forces commando. Mayor Hayes felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He quickly pulled up the video on his computer. He watched the slap, the fall, and the arrival of the silent, dangerous man and his dog. He heard Bert's voice loudly referencing the real estate deal. This is a disaster, Hayes breathed. You need to fix this, Richard. Harrison Price's voice was like ice. You and your pet sheriff. Bury it. Discredit the video. Pay the woman off. I don't care what you do, but if this mess jeopardizes the final land acquisition, my investors are going to want to know who to hold responsible, and I will give them your name. The line went dead. Back in Havenwood, the internet sleuths were already at work. Using facial recognition and cross-referencing local business directories, they had a name in under an hour: Bert Drummond, owner of Drummond Construction. In another hour, they had connected him to his primary client, Harrison Price and the Miller Preserve LLC. And from there, It was a short leap to his most prominent political backer, Mayor Richard Hayes, who had personally championed the zoning changes for Price's project. The names Burt Drummond, Harrison Price, and Mayor Richard Hayes started trending on Twitter right alongside #Justice for Eleanor. The ripple had reached the shore, and it was about to come crashing down on them all. The meeting took place in the back room of a high-end hunting lodge, a place that smelled of old leather, cedar, and under-the-table deals. This was Mayor Richard Hayes's unofficial office, a sanctuary of power far from the public eye of Town Hall. Harrison Price was already there, pacing in front of a massive stone fireplace where a small fire crackled. He had driven up from Columbus himself, his tailored suit looking ridiculous against the rustic backdrop. Sheriff Roy Miller leaned against a wall, cleaning his fingernails with a pocket knife, the picture of bored indifference. Mayor Hayes entered and shut the heavy oak door behind him, sealing them off from the outside world. "The problem is being contained," he announced, though his voice lacked conviction. Harrison Price spun around. "Contained? Richard, your problem has its own hashtag and is the #1 trending video in the country. My investors are calling. They're seeing headlines linking my company to a violent assault. Contained is not the word I would use." "Bert's an idiot," the mayor conceded, pouring himself a generous bourbon from a crystal decanter. "But he's our idiot. Roy's had a word with him. He'll keep his mouth shut." The sheriff grunted in agreement without looking up. "The problem isn't Bert keeping his mouth shut," Price said sharply, his voice cracking like a whip. "The problem is the woman's son, Jack Riley. My people have been digging. The man's a ghost. No social media, no public records beyond basic military service. But he's not just any soldier, Richard. He's a Navy SEAL, active duty. Do you have any idea what that means? It means he is a professional problem solver. And we," he gestured around the room, "are now his problem." This was the heart of their conspiracy laid bare in the firelight. For 2 years, the three men had run Havenwood as their private fiefdom. Their plan was simple and brutally effective. Harrison Price, with his deep-pocketed and ethically flexible investors, would identify prime real estate, particularly the undeveloped land around Miller's Reservoir. Mayor Hayes would then use his political influence to rezone the areas, create bureaucratic hurdles for existing owners, and approve Price's projects with suspicious speed. And their final, most crucial component was enforcement. That's where Sheriff Miller and men like Burt Drummond came in. When a homeowner refused a lowball offer, the harassment would begin. Sheriff Miller's deputies would suddenly start ticketing for minor code violations. Simple home repair permits would get lost in a sea of paperwork. Then Burt Drummond and his crew would escalate things: accidental property damage, late-night noise, verbal intimidation. Most people, especially retirees or vacation homeowners, eventually broke. They would sell cheap just to escape the nightmare. The plan had been flawless. They had already acquired 70% of the reservoir shoreline. Eleanor Vance's property was the last, crucial piece. It was the largest lot with the best view, the key to unlocking the entire multi-hundred-million-dollar Miller Preserve luxury resort. Her steadfast refusal to sell, inspired by her son's wish for her to have a peaceful retreat, was costing them millions in potential profit. The assault was supposed to be the final, terrifying push. It was meant to show her she wasn't safe, that her peaceful retirement would be anything but. "The son is just one man," Sheriff Miller finally said, snapping his knife shut with a click. "He's on leave. He'll make some noise, file a complaint, and then he'll have to go back to whatever hole he crawled out of. In the meantime, I'll handle things here." "How, Roy?" the mayor asked, a note of desperation in his voice. "The FBI could get involved. NCIS, for God's sake." "Let 'em come," the sheriff said with a lazy grin. "They'll find a simple assault case. Bert will get a slap on the wrist. I'll make sure the report is written up tight. Just a local dispute that got out of hand. Nothing connecting it to anything bigger. As for the son, we'll just keep an eye on him. Make sure he understands he's a guest here, and guests can be made to feel very unwelcome." Jack Riley knew he was being watched. He'd brought his mother back to the secluded house by the reservoir, a beautiful modern cabin of dark wood and large glass panels that overlooked the placid water of Miller's Reservoir. He had settled her into a comfortable armchair with a warm cup of tea and a blanket, but his mind was already in mission mode. His leave was over. As he stood at the large picture window, seemingly admiring the view, his eyes were actually scanning the tree line across the road. He'd noticed it on the drive-in, a dark blue sedan parked at a dirt turnoff a quarter-mile away. It had no reason to be there. It wasn't a fisherman's truck or a hiker's car, it was an observation post. "Kaiser, perimeter," he said softly. The German shepherd, who had been lying faithfully at his feet, rose without a sound. It trotted to the back door, and Jack let it out. Jack watched as the dog moved, not like a pet, but like a soldier, using the cover of the dense woods to sweep the property line in a wide, silent circle. Jack went to his duffel bag. From it, he pulled not clothes, but a series of small, discreet devices. He moved through the house with practiced efficiency, placing tiny wireless motion sensors at key entry points, doors, windows, and the long, dark driveway. He activated a small cellular jamming device that would disrupt any simple listening bugs that might have been placed nearby. Finally, he pulled out a small thermal monocular and scanned the woods again. He caught a fleeting heat signature from the blue sedan. 2 occupants. His peaceful retreat had just become a forward operating base. He sat down opposite his mother, his demeanor calm and reassuring. "Mom, I need you to stay inside for a while. Keep the doors locked. Don't answer for anyone but me." Eleanor looked at her son. She saw the quiet tension in his eyes, the subtle shift in his posture. She'd seen it before in the rare moments between his deployments when the weight of his hidden world would briefly show. She didn't know the details of his job, only that it was dangerous and important. She knew he was a protector. "Jack, what's going on?" she asked, her voice even. "The people who sent that man to the diner," he said, "they're not going to stop. The video going public has made them desperate. They're going to try to intimidate us into silence." He leaned forward. "But they made a critical mistake. They think they're dealing with a scared old woman and her son on vacation. They don't know who we are. They don't know that we don't get intimidated." He gave her a small, confident smile. A smile that said, "I've got this." "They wanted a fight for this piece of land," he said, his voice dropping to a low, determined whisper. "They're about to get one." The viral video was a wildfire, and Mayor Richard Hayes's first instinct was to fight it with force. His strategy, hatched with Sheriff Miller in the smoke-filled back room of the lodge, was twofold: discredit the source and silence the witnesses. The first target was Maya. She was in the middle of her afternoon shift, the diner still buzzing with gossip about the morning's events, when her manager, a perpetually worried man named Howard, called her into his small, cluttered office. Howard was a man who lived in fear of bad reviews, fear of the health inspector, and most of all, fear of upsetting powerful people like the mayor. "Maya," he began, avoiding her eyes and shuffling papers on his desk. "The corporation is aware of the incident this morning and the video you took." "I was recording a crime, Howard," Maya said, crossing her arms. She knew what was coming. "Be that as it may," he muttered, "you violated company policy. Our social media guidelines are very clear. You're not to post videos of the establishment or its patrons without permission." "I didn't post it. I sent it to the police as evidence and to a local news affiliate," she said, a small lie to see his reaction. "Isn't that what a good citizen is supposed to do?" Howard finally looked up, his eyes pleading. "Please, Maya, don't make this harder. My hands are tied. The mayor's office called directly. They feel your continued employment here reflects poorly on the diner's reputation." He swallowed hard. "I have to let you go. Here's your final check." Maya took the envelope without a word. She wasn't surprised, just angry. This was how power worked in Havenwood. A quiet phone call, an implied threat, and a good person lost her job. She looked at Howard, a man she'd known for years, and saw not a boss, but a coward. "You know this is wrong, Howard," she said quietly. "It's just business," he whispered, turning back to his paperwork, unable to face her. The second target was Ethan Cole. Ethan was on a creative high. His video was exploding. His subscriber count was skyrocketing, and his phone was ringing off the hook with calls from national news producers. He'd spent the afternoon giving phone interviews, feeling like a real investigative journalist. As evening fell, he drove back to his small rented cabin on the outskirts of town, whistling, dreaming of the career-making opportunities this story would bring. The first thing he noticed was the front door. It was slightly ajar, the wood around the lock splintered and broken. A cold dread washed over him, extinguishing his earlier excitement. He pushed the door open. The cabin was a mess, but not from a simple robbery. His clothes were tossed about, his suitcase upended. But the intruders had only been interested in one thing. On the floor in the center of the small living room lay the shattered remains of his MacBook Pro. The screen was cracked like a spiderweb. The keyboard was smashed in. His external hard drives had been swiped from the desk and stomped on, their plastic casings crushed. It wasn't theft. It was a message. It was the complete and utter destruction of his work. He knelt, his hands trembling. Everything had been on that laptop: the original video file, his backups, all of his vlogging work for the past year. He felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't a random break-in. This was professional. This was a warning delivered with brutal efficiency by someone who wanted to make sure he understood the stakes. He thought of Sheriff Roy Miller's lazy grin in the diner. This had his fingerprints all over it. In a large, tastefully decorated house on Havenwood's wealthiest hill, Helen Hayes was watching the evening news. Helen was the mayor's wife, a woman of elegant and refined beauty. In her youth, she had been vibrant and idealistic, but 25 years with Richard Hayes had slowly eroded her spirit, replacing it with a carefully maintained facade of serene composure. She had long known about her husband's corrupt dealings, turning a blind eye for the sake of peace, for the sake of the life he provided. But lately, the compromises had started to taste like poison. She watched the news report, which featured a short, grainy clip from Ethan's video. She saw the naked violence on Burt Drummond's face. She saw Eleanor Vance, a woman her own age, fall to the floor. And in that moment, something inside her broke. This was no longer about zoning laws or backroom deals. This was about cruelty. It was about the ugly, rotten core of the man she was married to. Just then, her husband walked into the room, loosening his tie. "Ridiculous, isn't it?" he said, gesturing at the TV. "The whole country in an uproar over a Barney in a diner. It's handled, by the way. The girl from the diner's been fired, and the travel photographer has been discouraged." He said it with a casual arrogance, a complete lack of remorse that sent a chill down Helen's spine. He wasn't just corrupt, he was an unfeeling monster. She waited. She waited until he was in the shower, the sound of the running water masking any noise she might make. Then, with her heart pounding in her chest, she walked into his private study. It was his sanctuary, a room of dark wood, leather-bound books, and secrets. Behind a large oil painting of a pastoral landscape was a wall safe. She knew the combination. She had watched him open it 100 times. Her cold, trembling fingers turned the dial. Right 22, left 58, right 11. The safe clicked open. Inside was his insurance policy. There were several leather-bound ledgers filled with his meticulous handwriting detailing every bribe paid, every kickback received. There was a small digital recorder containing audio of his most incriminating meetings with Price and Miller. And there was a single black USB drive labeled backup. With trembling hands, she took it all. She carried it to her own small office at the other end of the house. She had her own laptop, her own secrets. She plugged in the USB drive and began copying its contents to a duplicate drive she kept hidden in a jewelry box. File by file transferred over, spreadsheets, scanned documents, copies of offshore bank statements. Then she used a small device to copy the audio from the recorder. Just as the last file finished copying, she heard the shower turn off. Panic seized her. She quickly ejected the drives, placed her husband's originals back in the safe, and spun the dial. She had just swung the painting back into place when he walked into the study, a towel wrapped around his waist. "Helen, what are you doing in here?" he asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. She turned, forcing a calmness she didn't feel. "Just looking for a book, dear," she said, pulling a random volume from the shelf. "I couldn't sleep." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes narrowed. Then he seemed to relax. "Well, don't you worry about any of this. It will all be over by tomorrow." As he walked out, Helen leaned against the bookshelf, her legs weak with relief. He was wrong. It wasn't over. For him, it was just beginning. Clutched in her hand, hidden in the folds of her robe, was a small USB drive containing enough evidence to burn his entire world to the ground. The call came in the late afternoon. Eleanor was sitting by the large window overlooking the reservoir, a book open in her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in an hour. The house, which Jack had turned into a silent fortress of surveillance, felt both safe and confining. The caller ID was blocked. She let it ring 3 times before answering, her voice cautious. "Hello? Mrs. Vance?" The voice on the other end was female, educated, and strained, as if holding back a torrent of emotion. "My name is Helen Hayes. I'm the mayor's wife." Eleanor's hand tightened on the phone. She glanced toward the kitchen where Jack was methodically cleaning a piece of equipment, his movements precise and silent. "Yes, I know this is an incredibly forward request," Helen continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, "but I was hoping you might meet me. I feel I owe you a personal apology for what happened in the diner, for the inhospitable welcome you've received in our town." It was a plausible excuse, but Eleanor's instincts told her this was about something far more significant than an apology. "I'm not sure that's a good idea, Mrs. Hayes." "Please. Helen's voice cracked slightly. There's an old chapel, St. Michael's, on the edge of town. It's always quiet. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't a matter of extreme importance. Eleanor paused, her mind racing. A public apology from the mayor's wife would be a powerful statement, but the secrecy, the urgency, this felt different. It felt dangerous. She looked at Jack again. He was her protector, but she was not a passive participant in this battle. She had a role to play, too. I'll be there, Eleanor said, her decision made. When she told Jack, his face hardened. No. It's too risky. It could be a trap. It could also be a cry for help, Eleanor countered, her gaze unwavering. She sounded desperate, Jack. Not threatening. Sometimes you have to take a calculated risk to find an ally. Jack saw the steel in his mother's eyes and knew he couldn't argue. He'd inherited his resolve from her. All right, he conceded, but you're not going alone. I'll follow. I'll stay out of sight, but I'll be there. If anything feels wrong, you turn around and walk away. Understood? St. Michael's was a simple stone chapel set back from the road among a grove of old cottonwood trees whose yellow leaves trembled in the afternoon breeze. It was a place of peace, a stark contrast to the ugliness that had infected the town. Helen Hayes was already there, sitting in a front pew, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked smaller and more fragile than Eleanor had imagined, a woman drowning inside the gilded cage her husband had built for her. Eleanor sat in the pew behind her, leaving a respectful distance. Mrs. Hayes. Helen turned, her eyes red-rimmed, but her expression resolute. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Vance, and please, call me Helen. She glanced around the empty chapel. I chose this place because I have a confession to make. She took a deep breath. My apology is sincere, but it's not why I asked you here. I came to give you a weapon. From her handbag, she produced a small, black USB drive and held it out. Her hand was trembling. My husband, she began, her voice low and tense, has gone too far. For years, I told myself the deals he made were just politics, the price of progress. But what I saw on that video, what his man did to you, that wasn't politics. It was evil. He's destroying this town, hollowing it out from the inside for profit. Eleanor looked at the drive, then back at Helen's face. She saw not deceit, but a deep and painful sincerity. This was the act of a woman who had reached her breaking point. Why give this to me? Eleanor asked, her voice a gentle prod. Why not take it to the sheriff? Helen let out a short, bitter laugh. Sheriff Miller? He's my husband's lapdog. He enforces my husband's will. Any evidence I gave him would disappear, and I would likely have a tragic accident shortly thereafter. She leaned forward, her eyes pleading. I'm giving it to you because of your son. My husband and his friends, they understand bullies and money and threats. They don't understand men like Jack. They are terrified of the world he represents, a world with rules they can't bend and consequences they can't buy their way out of. She pressed the drive into Eleanor's hand. The cool plastic felt impossibly heavy. Everything is on there, Helen whispered. The ledgers, the secret bank accounts, the recordings of him, Price, and Miller planning how to intimidate people. Enough to put them all in prison for a very long time. I am trusting you, and by extension your son, to get this into the hands of people who are beyond my husband's reach. Eleanor closed her hand around the drive. She understood the immense risk Helen was taking. This was not just an act of conscience. It was an act of profound courage. You are a very brave woman, Helen. No, Helen said, rising, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. I am a coward who stayed silent for too long. I pray I'm not too late. With that, she turned and walked swiftly out of the chapel, leaving Eleanor alone in the silence with the key to Havenwood's salvation. When Eleanor returned to the house by the reservoir, Jack was waiting at the door, his posture tense. He relaxed slightly when he saw she was unharmed. Are you okay? What happened? Instead of answering right away, she walked to the dining table and placed the small USB drive in the center. Helen Hayes gave me this. Jack looked from the drive to his mother's serious face. She said it's everything, Eleanor explained. Proof of the whole conspiracy. She believes the local police are bought and that only you would know how to get it to the right authorities. Jack picked up the drive, examining it as if it were an unexploded bomb. He recognized the gravity of the moment. This tiny piece of technology had just turned their defensive posture into an offensive operation. Eleanor hadn't just met an ally, she had secured the critical intelligence that could win the war. He felt a surge of pride in her quiet strength and sharp judgment. She was as much a warrior as he was, just in a different arena. He went to his duffel bag and pulled out a matte black, heavily armored laptop. It was a military-grade encrypted device designed for field work. He powered it on, the operating system, a stripped-down secure version unfamiliar to any civilian user. He inserted the USB drive. Files and folders blossomed on the screen. He clicked on one. It was a meticulously detailed spreadsheet with columns for dates, names, and payment amounts. He saw names he recognized: Burt Drummond, several town council members next to figures that were clearly bribes. He clicked an audio file. Mayor Hayes's voice filled the quiet room, clear and damning. "Miller will handle that vlogger. Make it look like a robbery. We need that video gone." He opened another file. It was a scanned deed transfer showing a property sold by a harassed family to a shell corporation for a fraction of its value. That shell corporation was owned by Harrison Price. He sat back, a slow breath escaping his lips. It was all there, a systematic criminal enterprise laid bare. He looked at his mother, his expression grim but resolute. "You were right. This is everything." He picked up his encrypted satellite phone and made a second call to his contact in Special Operations Command. "This is Riley," he said, his voice like steel. "The situation here has escalated. I have come into possession of critical evidence detailing a multi-level criminal conspiracy involving public officials. The evidence is digital and time-sensitive. I am formally requesting an immediate and direct handover to a joint NCIS and FBI task force. This needs to come from the top down. I repeat, local authorities are compromised. This needs to be a federal operation, and it needs to happen now." The arrival of the federal government was not a thunderous raid. It was a quiet, creeping dawn. Two black Suburbans, devoid of any official markings, rolled into the sleeping town of Havenwood just as the first pale light of morning crested the eastern horizon. They used no sirens. They didn't have to. Their silent, purposeful advance was more intimidating than any sound. The lead vehicle pulled into the long driveway of the house by the reservoir. Jack was already waiting on the porch, Kaiser sitting calmly at his side. He had been up all night, watching, waiting. A woman in a dark pantsuit stepped out of the passenger seat. She was in her 40s with dark hair pulled into a tight bun and a sharp, intelligent face that had no room for pleasantries. This was Special Agent in Charge Isabella Martinez of the FBI's Cleveland Field Office, a woman with a reputation for meticulous attention to detail and zero tolerance for corruption. "Mr. Riley," she said, her voice a low, professional alto. "It wasn't a question. I'm Sac Martinez. We spoke with your CO. Thank you for securing the asset." "Agent Martinez," Jack replied with a nod. "My mother is inside. The drive is on the kitchen table." Martinez's team, a mix of FBI and NCIS agents, moved with a silent, synchronized efficiency that Jack recognized and respected. They swept the house for bugs, established a secure communications link, and treated his mother with professional deference. A forensics technician in a polo shirt and slacks took the USB drive from Jack, placing it in an anti-static evidence bag. "The evidence you and your mother provided is substantial," Martinez said, standing with Jack on the porch as her team worked. "It corroborates several ongoing investigations into Mr. Price's activities across multiple states. What started as a local conspiracy here is turning out to be one branch of a much larger criminal enterprise." She looked out at the calm reservoir. "We're calling it Operation Clean Slate, and today we're wiping this town clean." The first domino to fall was the mayor. Richard Hayes was awake. He hadn't slept. He'd spent the night drinking bourbon and staring at his phone, watching his carefully constructed world burn on social media. The final blow had come an hour before dawn, a call from a panicked Harrison Price. "They know, Richard. They know everything. My source says the feds are moving. A joint task force." After the call ended, Hayes had walked to the large window in his study, the same one his wife had stood at just the night before. He'd seen them, the black Suburbans, one parked discreetly at the end of the road from his own home. He knew with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty what had happened. It wasn't just the video. It was Helen. She had done it. She had taken his secrets and delivered them to his enemies. The one person he had never considered a threat had become his executioner. He felt a strange calm settle over him. It was the calm of a man who was out of moves, out of lies, out of time. He was a king whose castle was about to be stormed, and there was no escape. He walked to his heavy oak desk and unlocked the top drawer. Inside, beneath a stack of old town charters, was a Smith & Wesson Model 10, the service revolver he'd been issued as a young deputy decades ago. He'd kept it as a memento of a time when his ambitions were simpler, cleaner. He looked at the photo on his desk, a smiling picture of him and Helen on their wedding day. They were both so young, so full of hope. Where had it all gone wrong? He knew the answer. It was 1,000 small compromises, 1,000 small acts of greed that had built into an avalanche of corruption he could never escape. He heard the crunch of tires on the gravel outside. The FBI was here. He could hear their quiet, professional voices at the front door. He would not let them put him in cuffs. He would not let them parade him in front of the town he had both built and poisoned. He would write his own ending. When Sack Martinez's team breached the front door, they found the study locked. They broke it down to find Mayor Richard Hayes slumped over his desk, the old revolver still in his hand. His reign was over. The second domino fell in the center of town. Sheriff Roy Miller was enjoying his morning coffee, feet up on his desk, when Sack Martinez and two of her largest agents walked into his office without knocking. He slowly lowered his feet, a look of annoyance on his face. "Well now, you folks are a little far from the big city, ain't ya? What can I do for the FBI today?" Martinez didn't waste time on pleasantries. She placed a warrant on his desk. "Roy Miller, you're under arrest." The sheriff actually laughed, a short, barking sound. "Arrested for what? For protecting my town from outside agitators? For conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and multiple violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act," Martinez stated, her voice as cold and hard as steel. "Your town was a criminal enterprise, and you were its chief enforcer." The color drained from Miller's face. The word RICO was a death knell. He knew what it meant. He looked from Martinez to the two stone-faced agents flanking her. The lazy confidence that had been his brand for 20 years dissolved into naked panic. "This is a mistake," he blustered, getting to his feet. "You don't have jurisdiction here without." "We have a federal warrant, Sheriff," Martinez said, cutting him off. "And as of this moment, your jurisdiction is limited to a 6 by 8 foot cell." She nodded to her agents. "Cuff him." The sight of Sheriff Roy Miller being led from his own station in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief and horror, brought the town of Havenwood to a standstill. People came out of their shops and homes, watching in stunned silence as the symbol of corrupt, untouchable power was stripped of his authority and led away like a common criminal. The final domino fell at 30,000 feet. Harrison Price was not a man to wait for the axe to fall. The moment he hung up with Hayes, he had initiated his escape plan. A private jet was waiting for him at a small executive airport outside Columbus. His destination, the Cayman Islands, where he had millions tucked away in untraceable accounts and no extradition treaty with the United States. He was settling into his leather seat, a glass of champagne in his hand, watching the runway lights blur as the jet accelerated for takeoff. He felt a surge of relief. He'd done it. He'd gotten away from them. Suddenly, the plane's acceleration stopped. The engines throttled down and the jet slowed, turning off the main runway. "What the hell is going on?" Price demanded of the pilot over the intercom. "Tower is ordering us back to the hangar, sir," the pilot's strained voice replied. "They've closed the airspace. There are federal vehicles blocking the taxiway." Price looked out the window and his blood ran cold. On the tarmac below, a line of black Suburbans had formed a perfect, inescapable barricade. When the jet's door opened, it wasn't the ground crew waiting for him. It was a team of FBI agents in tactical gear. As they led him down the steps in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, his face pale with fury and defeat, Harrison Price no longer looked like a master of the universe, but like what he was, a common thief who had finally been caught. The weeks following the arrests were a quiet, strange time in Havenwood. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape that was both broken and cleansed. The federal presence, once a fleet of black Suburbans, had dwindled to a small, discreet team of auditors working out of a temporary office in the town hall. The names Hayes, Miller, and Price were spoken only in hushed, cautionary tones, like figures in a dark local legend. The state had moved quickly to fill the power vacuum. They appointed an interim town manager, a sharp, competent woman in her 50s named Anna Sharma. Miss Sharma had a reputation as a fixer, a municipal turnaround specialist sent into communities in crisis. She had a calm, no-nonsense demeanor and an unimpeachable air of integrity. It was exactly what the traumatized town needed. One of her first official acts was to call a town meeting, not for recriminations, but for rebuilding. Meanwhile, the town began to heal in small, daily ways. At the Main Street Diner, a regional manager from the corporate office arrived. He fired Howard on the spot for his cowardice and complicity. Then, he went to Maya Vance, who had been helping out as a volunteer, and offered her the position of general manager. Maya, stunned but resolute, accepted immediately. The diner, the scene of the original crime, became the first symbol of the town's recovery, a place where integrity was now the main course. Jack and Eleanor, who had planned to leave after the immediate threat was gone, found themselves staying. Their quiet vacation had turned into something else entirely. They felt a responsibility, a connection to the community they had inadvertently thrown into chaos and now had a chance to help rebuild. At Ms. Sharma's request, Eleanor, with her quiet wisdom and unshakable moral compass, agreed to co-chair a new Citizens Oversight Committee tasked with ensuring transparency in all future town contracts and governance. The night of the town meeting, the community hall was packed. There was a palpable tension in the air, a mixture of anxiety, grief, and a fragile, flickering hope. Ms. Sharma ran the meeting with brisk efficiency, laying out a clear, step-by-step plan for financial audits, a special election, and community-led development initiatives. Then, halfway through the meeting, the back doors opened, and Bert Drummond walked in. A wave of silence washed over the hall. He was thinner, his face pale and drawn. He was no longer the swaggering bully from the diner, but a humbled man who looked as though he were carrying the weight of the entire town on his shoulders. He walked slowly up the center aisle, not to the stage, but to a public microphone set up for citizen comments. He stood there for a long moment, looking out at the faces of his neighbors, faces filled with contempt, anger, and suspicion. He cleared his throat, his voice raspy and unsteady. "My name is Bert Drummond," he began, his voice cracking. "And I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. What I did, there's no excuse for it. I was a bully. I was a coward. I let greed and resentment turn me into a monster." He looked directly at the front row where Eleanor and Jack were seated. "Mrs. Vance, Mr. Riley, I am so sorry for what I did to you. I attacked you, Mrs. Vance, because I was told to, because I thought it was the easy way, but mostly because I was weak. I was scared of the changes happening in our town, and instead of meeting them with courage, I chose to meet them with hate." Tears were now streaming down his face, and he didn't bother to wipe them away. "I have cooperated fully with the federal prosecutors," he continued, his voice gaining strength with conviction. "I've told them everything I know about everyone involved. I'll take whatever sentence they give me, but that's not enough. That's just punishment. It doesn't fix anything." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "So, starting tomorrow, my company, Drummond Construction, will be offering its services, free of charge, to every family that was harassed or targeted by Hayes' scheme. If your fence was broken, we'll fix it. If your property was vandalized, we will repair it. I'm going to spend every last dollar I have trying to fix some of the damage I helped cause." The hall was completely silent. No one had expected this. It wasn't just an apology. It was an act of restitution. Bert's shoulders slumped. "That's all I have to say. I'll leave you be." He turned to go, but Jack's voice, calm and clear, stopped him. "Mr. Drummond." Bert froze, turning back, his face a mask of dread, expecting a final condemnation. Jack stood up. He didn't look angry, he looked assessing. "Your apology is a start," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "Your actions will determine if it was a sincere one. This town doesn't need more division. It needs people willing to rebuild what was broken." He glanced at his mother, who gave a slight, affirmative nod. "My mother and I," Jack continued, "accept your offer to help this community heal." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something more important. It was a chance. It was an acknowledgement that even the worst among them could choose a different path. A single clap started in a corner of the room, then spread, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. It wasn't for Bert the bully, but for the possibility of redemption. In the days that followed, the town truly began to change. Bert Drummond was true to his word, his trucks becoming a familiar sight as his crews repaired damaged properties, their work a quiet, daily apology. Jack found himself an unlikely community figure, his quiet strength a source of reassurance for many. But it was Kaiser who became the town's true icon. Children, no longer afraid, would approach him cautiously in the park, and he would greet them with a gentle nudge of his head. He became a symbol, not of the violence that had brought him into their lives, but of the quiet, unshakable protection that had saved them. He was Havenwood's guardian, a silent promise that the town was safe. One evening, as the sun set behind the vast fields, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and purple, Jack and Eleanor sat on their porch by the reservoir. The air was cool, and the only sound was the gentle lapping of water against the shore. "You know," Eleanor said, a slight smile on her lips, "this wasn't exactly the peaceful retirement you promised me." Jack looked at her, his expression soft. "No," he admitted, "it wasn't." "You were magnificent, Jack," she said, placing her hand on his. "You protected us all." "Protecting you is always my mission, Mom," he replied quietly. "That never changes, no matter where we are. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. The house by the reservoir was no longer just a property on a map, a point of contention. It was home. It was a place where a family had made a stand, where a community had found its courage, and where, after a long and painful storm, a new dawn was finally breaking over Havenwood.